The iron door slammed shut behind Nessa Valegard with a sound that echoed like a final judgment. She stood in the dim stone corridor leading to the royal kennels, a wooden bucket of raw meat gripped tightly in both hands. The guards had not looked at her when they shoved her forward. One of them had only muttered under his breath, "Better her than us," before locking the gate. At the far end of the corridor, behind thick iron bars, something large and dark shifted. Mournfang, the Alpha King's mad wolf. The beast had not eaten in 3 days. It had already torn through 2 handlers and killed a third. The court had grown tired of its uncontrollable rage. So they chose the lowest servant in the palace, the girl with no family, no name worth remembering, and sent her in with a bucket of meat. Nessa's hands trembled around the wooden handle, but she did not drop it. She walked forward. The smell of blood, old fur, and rage grew stronger with every step. When she reached the heavy iron gate, she saw the wolf clearly for the first time. Mournfang was massive. Its black fur was matted with dried blood and dust. One golden eye was clouded white from an old wound, while the other burned with a feral, broken light. Scars crossed its muzzle and shoulders like old maps of violence. It growled low in its throat, the sound vibrating through the stone floor and into her bones. Nessa set the bucket down just outside the bars. The wolf lunged. Its massive body slammed against the gate. The iron rattled violently. Saliva flew from its jaws as it snapped its teeth inches from her fingers. The low growl turned into a furious snarl that promised death. Nessa did not run. She stayed exactly where she was, one hand still resting on the bucket. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she kept her feet planted and her gaze steady. The wolf snapped again, closer this time. She did not pull away. Instead, she slowly lifted her empty hand and held it out, palm open, just close enough for the beast to catch her scent. The snarling stopped. Mournfang's head tilted, its single golden eye narrowed. The wolf took one slow, heavy step forward, then another, until its scarred muzzle was almost touching her fingers. It sniffed. A long, deep inhale. Then something impossible happened. The massive black wolf lowered its head. It pressed its scarred forehead gently against Nessa's open palm. The touch was warm and rough, almost careful. For a moment, the beast simply stayed there, breathing against her skin. Then it spoke. The voice was low, rough, and ancient, not the sound of a normal wolf, but something deeper that seemed to come from the stone itself. Nessa. The name echoed in the stone corridor. Nessa's breath caught in her throat. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in years, not since the night someone in the scent hall had burned it from every royal record, not since the night her scent had been stolen from the air itself. The wolf lifted its head. Its golden eye met hers. Nessa Valegard. The name came out clearer this time, like a memory being pulled from the dark. Nessa's hand trembled against the wolf's fur. From the shadows at the far end of the corridor, a tall figure stood watching in silence. Alpha King Ronvek Ashbane had never ordered a servant sent inside. He had come to the kennels to stop the feeding before another body was dragged out. But he had arrived too late. Now he stood half hidden behind a stone pillar, golden eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. His wolf, the one that had been slowly dying inside him for years, struck once against his ribs. Not in rage, in recognition, and it knew her. Ronvek's hand tightened around the stone pillar until his knuckles turned white. The mad wolf had spoken a name that no longer existed in any royal record, and it had spoken it to the lowest servant in his palace. Something long buried inside the king had just woken, and it knew her. Ronvek Ashbane stepped out from behind the stone pillar. The sound of his boots against the stone floor made Nessa turn sharply. Her hand was still resting against Mornfang's scarred forehead. The massive wolf did not move away from her. Instead, it stayed pressed against her palm, its single golden eye watching the king with wary calm. Ronvek stopped a few paces from the gate. He looked at Nessa as if seeing her for the first time. She was small, thin from years of hard labor. Her dark hair was tied back with a simple strip of cloth, and her servant's dress was worn and faded. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that should have drawn the attention of a mad royal wolf. Yet the beast that had killed 3 men in 3 days was now standing quietly with its forehead against her hand. Ronvek's voice was low when he finally spoke. "Who are you?" Nessa slowly lowered her hand. Mornfang let out a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, but something closer to protest. "My name is Nessa," she answered quietly. "I serve in the lower kitchens." Ronvek's golden eyes narrowed. "That is not the name," the wolf spoke. Nessa hesitated. Her fingers curled slightly against her palm. "It spoke what it remembered," she said. "Not what the records say." Ronvek took 1 step closer to the gate. The air between them felt heavier. "Say it again," he ordered. Nessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nessa Valegard." The name seemed to hang in the air between them. Ronvek's wolf struck against his ribs again, harder this time. A sharp, painful jolt of recognition that made his breath catch. He had not felt his wolf react this strongly in years. Not since the night he was told his mate had died in a border accident. He had mourned her in silence. He had buried the bond deep inside his chest until it began to rot. And yet now, standing in front of a servant girl, his wolf was awake and furious. Ronvek's voice dropped lower. "Valegard. That name no longer exists in any record of this palace." Nessa nodded once, because someone made sure it would not. Ronvek studied her face. There was no defiance in her eyes, only a quiet, tired kind of honesty. She did not beg. She did not explain further. She simply stood there, waiting. Mornfang shifted behind the bars. The wolf moved closer to Nessa again, its large body positioning itself between her and the king, as if protecting her. Ronvek noticed. He also noticed the way the beast's breathing had steadied. The madness that had burned in its eye for months seemed quieter now. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Nessa looked down at her own hands. "The Centaurs," she said. "The night they burned my name, Varen held the seal. He erased me from every scroll. Then he burned my scent from the air." Ronvek's jaw tightened. "Why?" Nessa lifted her eyes to meet his. "Because you were never supposed to remember me." The words landed like a blade between them. Ronvek took another step forward until he was almost touching the iron bars. Mornfang growled softly in warning, but did not attack. Ronvek ignored the wolf. He looked directly at Nessa. "Tell me everything." Nessa looked at him for a long moment. "Not here," she said. "Not while the walls still listen." Ronvek understood what she meant. The palace had ears, many of them belonging to Varen. He studied her for a few more seconds, then gave a short nod. "Tonight," he said, "after the court has retired, you will come to the Eastern Tower." Nessa hesitated. "And if I refuse?" Ronvek's golden eyes darkened, but his voice remained steady. "Then I will send no guards," he said. "I will come myself, but I will not let Varen reach you first." Nessa held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I will come." Ronvek turned to leave, but before he reached the end of the corridor, he stopped and looked back. The mad wolf was still standing close to Nessa, its scarred head lowered near her shoulder. Ronvek's voice was quiet. "Mornfang has not let anyone near him in months," he said. yet it stands beside you like a guardian. Nessa looked at the wolf. Her expression softened for the first time. He remembers what the rest of the palace was made to forget. Ronvek said nothing more. He walked away, the sound of his boots echoing down the stone corridor. Nessa remained where she was, her hand resting lightly against Mournfang's fur. The wolf leaned into her touch. From the shadows of the upper walkway, a pair of cold eyes watched the entire exchange. High Scent Keeper Varen stood perfectly still, his fingers curled around the railing. A black scent witness charm hung beneath the railing, carrying every word to him. He had seen the wolf speak. He had seen the king react. And he had seen the way Nessa Valegard looked at Ronvek, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited a very long time. Varen's lips thinned. The spell was breaking. He would have to act faster than planned. In his palm, the black scent seal he had used to erase her name cracked once. The eastern tower was colder than the rest of the palace. Nessa stood outside the heavy wooden door, her hand hovering just above the iron handle. She had changed out of her servant's dress into a simple dark tunic and trousers clothes she had hidden away for years. Her hair was still tied back, but a few strands had come loose and now framed her face. She took a slow breath and pushed the door open. Ronvek was already inside. He stood by the tall window, his back to her, golden eyes fixed on the snow-covered courtyard below. The fire in the hearth crackled quietly, casting long shadows across the stone walls. On the table beside him lay an old leather-bound book and a small silver chain, the same kind that had once been used to mark royal bonds. He did not turn around when she entered. "Close the door," he said. Nessa did as he asked. The heavy wood clicked shut behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ronvek finally turned. His gaze swept over her, not as a king looking at a servant, but as a man trying to piece together a memory that had been torn apart. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Nessa remained standing. "I would rather stand," she replied quietly. Ronvek studied her for a second, then nodded. "As you wish." He walked to the table and picked up the silver chain, turning it slowly between his fingers. "Varen told me my mate died in a border raid 5 years ago," he said. "He said her body was never recovered. He said the bond had broken because she was gone." Nessa's voice was steady. "He lied." Ronvek looked up at her. "Then tell me the truth." Nessa took one step closer. "Because Varen burned my name and scent from your memory," she said. "I do not know every spell he used. I only know I woke one night with my name gone from every scroll and your wolf no longer knew how to find me." Ronvek's fingers tightened around the chain. "Why would he do that?" Nessa looked straight at him. "Because someone wanted you free to bond another bloodline," she said. "Varen was paid to make sure I became no one." The silver chain in Ronvek's hand gave one soft click, as if a hidden clasp had remembered her name. He looked down at it, then back at Nessa. "Valegard," he said quietly. "That name, I have heard it before. In dreams I could never hold on to." Nessa nodded. "You gave me that chain the night you chose me. You said it would mark me as yours until the formal bonding." Ronvek turned the chain over in his palm. The metal felt warm now. He looked at her again, his golden eyes darker than before. "Tell me what happened after." Nessa's voice was quiet, but clear. "Varen came to my chambers 3 nights before the ceremony. He said the pack needed strength, not sentiment. He said you would be better off with Lady Kalira Voss. When I refused to leave quietly, he burned my name from every record and stripped my scent from the air. By morning, no one in the palace remembered who I was, not even you." Ronvek was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "I have been mourning a ghost for 5 years. Every full moon, my wolf would howl until it could barely stand. I thought it was madness. I thought it was grief. He looked at her. But it was you. Nessa held his gaze. It was always you, she said softly. Ronvek crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. He reached out and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed over the faint scar on her wrist, the place where the scent bond mark had once been. His voice dropped lower. I do not remember the day I lost you, he said, but I remember the emptiness that came after. It has been eating at me for 5 years. Nessa looked up at him, and now Ronvek looked at her, really looked at her. Now, he said, my wolf is awake, and it is angry. He released her hand and stepped back. Varan will know that the spell is breaking. He will try to finish what he started. Nessa nodded. He already has a plan. He wants to force the bonding ceremony before the next full moon. Once the bond is sealed with Kalira, even if you remember me, it will be too late. Ronvek's golden eyes darkened. They will not get the chance. He walked to the door and opened it slightly, checking the corridor outside. When he was satisfied no one was listening, he turned back to Nessa. Tomorrow, he said, I will open the old bond records myself, and you will stand beside me when I do. Nessa's eyes widened slightly. They will try to silence me. Ronvek's voice was cold and final. They will try, he said, and they will fail. He stepped closer again, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Until then, he said quietly, you will not leave my sight. You will stay in the Eastern Tower. I will have guards posted, my own men, not Varen's. Nessa looked up at him. And if Varen comes for me before then? Ronvek's answer was immediate. Then he will have to go through me. Nessa held his gaze for a long moment. For the first time in 5 years, something warm and dangerous flickered in her chest. Hope. Ronvek reached out once more and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Rest, he said. Tomorrow the truth will begin to surface. He turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, Nessa spoke. Ronvek. He stopped. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for believing me. Ronvek's expression softened for the first time. I do not believe you, he said. I remember you. He left without another word. Nessa stood alone in the tower room, the fire crackling softly beside her. Outside, the wind howled across the palace walls. And somewhere in the depths of the scent hall, High Scent Keeper Varen stood before a black mirror, his fingers tracing the cracked scent seal in his palm. The mirror showed him Nessa standing in the Eastern Tower, and it showed Ronvek walking away from her with purpose in his step. Varen's eyes narrowed. The spell was not just breaking, it was reversing. He would need to move tonight. In the mirror, the image of the Eastern Tower darkened as the first scent lock sealed around its door. The Eastern Tower had become a cage. Nessa stood by the tall window, watching the snow fall outside. She had tried to open the door a few minutes ago, only to find it sealed shut by an invisible force. When she pressed her hand against the wood, a cold, sharp pain shot up her arm, the unmistakable burn of a scent lock. Varen had moved faster than she expected. She turned when she heard footsteps outside. The door shuddered once, then twice, as if something heavy was being pressed against it from the other side. A low voice spoke from beyond the wood. Stay quiet, little ghost. The king will come for you soon enough. And when he does, I will be waiting. Nessa recognized the voice immediately. High Scent Keeper Varen. She stepped back from the door, her heart pounding. Varen continued, his tone calm and almost polite. You should have stayed forgotten, Nessa Valegard. The palace was kinder to you when you had no name. Nessa did not answer. She knew better than to waste words on a man who had already decided she would not leave this tower alive. Instead, she moved to the small table where Ronvek had left the silver chain. She picked it up and held it tightly in her palm. The metal was still warm. Outside, the wind howled louder. Ronvek was in the war room when he felt it. A sudden, sharp pain in his chest, not physical, but something deeper. His wolf struck against his ribs hard enough to make him stagger. He knew immediately. Something was wrong with Nessa. He left the room without a word and headed straight for the eastern tower. The corridors were unusually quiet. Even the guards he passed seemed to avoid his gaze. When he reached the tower stairs, he stopped. A faint, bitter scent hung in the air, shadowroot mixed with something older and colder. Varen's work. Ronvek's golden eyes narrowed. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached the top, he placed his hand against the heavy wooden door. It did not open. Instead, a sharp, icy pain lanced up his arm. The scent lock reacted to his touch, trying to push him away. Ronvek growled low in his throat. His wolf was furious. He stepped back and slammed his shoulder against the door. The wood groaned but did not break. The scent lock was strong, stronger than anything he had felt in years. "Nessa!" he called out. There was a moment of silence. Then her voice came from inside, steady despite the danger. "I'm here." Varen sealed the door. Ronvek pressed his hand against the wood again, ignoring the burning pain. "Step back from the door," he ordered. Nessa moved away. Ronvek took a deep breath. His wolf surged forward, lending him strength. He slammed into the door again, this time with everything he had. The scent lock cracked. The door burst inward with a loud crash. Ronvek stepped inside, his eyes immediately finding Nessa. She stood near the window, the silver chain still clutched in her hand. She looked unharmed, but her face was pale. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms without thinking. Nessa stiffened for a second, then relaxed against him. "You came," she whispered. Ronvek held her tighter. "I said I would not let Varen reach you first." He pulled back, just enough to look at her face. "Are you hurt?" Nessa shook her head. "No, but the lock is strong. Varen must have used something old." Ronvek glanced at the broken door. The remnants of the scent lock still flickered faintly around the frame, like dying embers. "He is getting desperate," Ronvek said. "That is good. Desperate men make mistakes." He took the silver chain from her hand and slipped it into his pocket. "Come with me. We cannot stay here." Nessa followed him to the door. But just as they were about to step out, a low, mocking laugh echoed from the stairwell below. Varen's voice drifted up. "Leaving so soon, Your Majesty? I was hoping we could talk." Ronvek pushed Nessa gently behind him and stepped out onto the landing. Varen stood at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by 2 of his personal guards. His black robes were immaculate, and a cold smile played on his lips. "You should have stayed in your chambers, Ronvek," Varen said. "It would have been easier for everyone." Ronvek's voice was ice. "You sealed my tower. You attacked the woman under my protection. Give me one reason why I should not kill you where you stand." Varen's smile did not waver. "Because if you kill me now, the truth about Nessa Valegard will die with me. And you will never know the full extent of what was taken from you." Ronvek took 1 step down the stairs. "I already know enough." Varen tilted his head. "Do you? Do you know why your wolf has been dying for 5 years? Do you know what will happen if you try to bond with her now?" He gestured toward Nessa. "The spell that erased her was not simple. It was tied to your wolf. If you force the bond to return, your wolf may not survive the shock. You may lose everything. Your throne, your strength, even your life." Nessa's hand tightened on Ronvek's sleeve. Ronvek did not look away from Varen. You are lying. Varen's smile widened. Am I? Then come down and test it. Bring the girl. Let us see what remains of the great Alpha King when his wolf finally breaks. Ronvek was about to move when Nessa spoke softly behind him. He is not lying about one thing, she said. The spell was tied to you. If we force it, there is a risk. Ronvek turned his head slightly, his golden eyes meeting hers. Then we break it carefully, he said. Together, he looked back at Varen. Step aside. Varen did not move. Instead, he raised one hand. A wave of dark scent magic surged up the stairs, thick, choking, and filled with the bitter smell of shadow root. Ronvek pushed Nessa back into the tower and stepped forward to meet it. His wolf roared inside him. The two forces collided in a burst of silver and black light. The tower shook, and somewhere deep in the palace, Lady Kalira Voss stood by her window, watching the eastern tower glow with unnatural light. She smiled faintly. The game had begun. The clash of magic shook the eastern tower. Ronvek stood on the stairs, his body braced against the wave of dark scent magic Varen had unleashed. Silver light from his wolf clashed with the black, choking fog, sending sparks flying in every direction. The air smelled of shadow root and burning stone. Behind him, Nessa pressed her back against the wall, the silver chain still clutched in her hand. She could feel the old bond stirring between them. Faint, but growing stronger with every second Ronvek fought. Varen stood at the bottom of the stairs, calm and composed, as if he were merely conducting a lesson rather than trying to kill the king. You cannot win this way, Ronvek, Varen called out. The spell that erased her was woven into your wolf's very blood. Every time you try to remember her, you are tearing yourself apart. Ronvek growled, low and dangerous. Then I will tear myself apart until she is whole again. He pushed forward, forcing the dark magic back step by step. His golden eyes burned with fury and something deeper recognition, pain, and a growing devotion he could no longer deny. Nessa watched him fight and felt something crack open inside her chest. For 5 years, she had waited in silence. She had served in the shadows, watching the man she loved slowly die from a wound he did not understand. Now he was fighting for her, not because he remembered everything, but because something inside him refused to let her go again. Varen's smile faded slightly. He raised both hands and whispered an ancient command. The scent magic thickened into sharp, invisible blades that slashed toward Ronvek's chest. Ronvek raised his arm to block them, but one blade grazed his side. A deep, burning cut opened across his ribs. Blood soaked into his dark tunic. Nessa gasped. Ronvek. She moved without thinking, stepping out from behind him. The silver chain in her hand glowed faintly as she pressed it against his wound. The chain pulsed with warm light. The bleeding slowed. Ronvek looked down at her in surprise, then back at Varen. Varen's eyes narrowed. So the bond is already trying to return, he muttered. Faster than I expected. He took one step back and raised his voice. Enough games. He pulled a small black vial from his robes and threw it at the floor between them. The vial shattered. A thick cloud of shadow root smoke exploded upward, filling the stairwell. The smoke was not just blinding. It carried a heavy, suffocating scent that made it hard to breathe and harder to think. Ronvek grabbed Nessa's hand. Stay close to me. He pulled her back into the tower room and slammed the broken door shut behind them. The smoke still seeped through the cracks, but it was thinner inside. Nessa coughed, pressing her sleeve to her mouth. What now? She asked between breaths. Ronvek looked around the room quickly. His gaze landed on the tall window. We go out, he said. Nessa followed his eyes. The drop from the eastern tower was steep, at least 4 stories down to the snow-covered courtyard. But there was a narrow ledge running along the outside wall, and from there they could reach the roof of the adjacent building. Ronvek moved to the window and forced it open. Cold wind rushed in. He turned to Nessa. "Can you climb?" Nessa nodded. "I used to climb the old walls when I was younger, before they erased me." Ronvek gave her a small, grim smile. "Good." He helped her onto the windowsill. Nessa stepped out onto the narrow stone ledge, pressing her back against the cold wall. The wind whipped at her hair and clothes. Ronvek followed right behind her. Below them, Baron's voice echoed up from the tower. "You cannot run from what was done to you, Ronvek. The longer you fight the spell, the faster your wolf will die." Ronvek ignored him. He and Nessa moved carefully along the ledge. The stone was icy and slippery, but they moved with purpose. When they reached the corner where the tower met the adjacent roof, Ronvek boosted Nessa up first, then pulled himself after her. They crouched on the slanted roof, breathing hard. Ronvek looked at Nessa. Snow clung to her dark hair and eyelashes. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold and the fight. "Are you all right?" he asked. Nessa nodded. "I'm fine, but we cannot stay here long. Varen will have the guards searching soon." Ronvek glanced toward the main palace. "We need to reach the old archives," he said. "The bond records are kept there. If I can see them with my own eyes, I will know exactly what Varen did." Nessa hesitated. "The archives are heavily guarded, and Varen has influence there." Ronvek's golden eyes hardened. "Then we go quietly, and if anyone tries to stop us—" He paused. "They will learn what happens when an Alpha King's wolf remembers what was stolen from him." He reached out and gently wiped a snowflake from her cheek. Nessa looked at him, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "Ronvek, if opening the records puts you in danger—" He cut her off gently. "I have already been in danger for 5 years," he said. "I just did not know why." He stood up on the roof and offered her his hand. "Come, we move now while the court is still asleep." Nessa took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Together they began making their way across the rooftops toward the old archives, staying low and using the shadows. Far below, in the eastern tower, Varen stood among the broken remnants of his scentlock. His expression was no longer calm. He turned to the 2 guards beside him. "Find them," he ordered. "But do not kill the girl. I still need her alive." One of the guards hesitated. "And the king?" Varen's eyes were cold. "If he gets in the way, then the king dies too." He looked out toward the rooftops, where 2 figures were moving through the snow. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Let the hunt begin." The old archives were buried deep beneath the palace, in a section of the castle that had not been used in decades. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of old parchment and dried ink. Torches lined the stone walls, casting flickering shadows across rows of heavy wooden shelves. Ronvek and Nessa moved quietly through the narrow passages. Ronvek led the way, his golden eyes sharp in the dim light. Nessa stayed close behind him, the silver chain still hidden in her pocket. They had managed to slip past the outer guards by using the old servant passages, but Ronvek knew they would not have much time. Varan's men would be searching the palace by now. When they reached the sealed iron door that led to the restricted records, Ronvek stopped. He placed his hand against the cold metal. Ancient runes glowed faintly beneath his palm, recognizing the blood of the Ashbane line. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was larger than Nessa expected. Tall shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with thick leather-bound books and sealed scrolls. In the center of the room stood a large stone table covered in old documents. Ronvek moved straight to the section marked with the royal bond sigil. He began pulling out thick volumes, flipping through pages with growing urgency. Nessa stood nearby, watching him. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened every time he read something that did not match what he remembered. After several minutes, Ronvek stopped. He pulled out a particular scroll and unrolled it on the stone table. His eyes scanned the faded writing. Then he went very still. Nessa stepped closer. "What is it?" she asked softly. Ronvek's voice was low and rough when he finally spoke. "This is the record of my bonding ceremony, or what was supposed to be one." He pointed to a line near the bottom. Nessa leaned in to read. The name written there was not Lady Kalira Voss. It was Nessa Valegard. The date was 5 years ago. Below the name was a note in different handwriting. Bonding ceremony canceled. Mate deceased in border incident. Records sealed by order of High Scent Keeper Varen. Ronvek stared at the words for a long time. His hand curled into a fist on the table. "They did not just erase your name from the air," he said quietly. "They rewrote the official history of my own life." Nessa placed her hand gently over his. "I tried to tell you that night," she whispered, "before Varen took me away. But you were already under the spell. You looked at me like I was a stranger." Ronvek turned to face her. His golden eyes were filled with pain and something much deeper. "I should have known," he said. "Even when I could not remember your face, my wolf never stopped searching. Every night I would wake up with your scent in my lungs, and then it would fade." He reached out and cupped her cheek. "I am sorry," he said, "for every day you had to live as a ghost in my own palace." Nessa leaned into his touch. "You are here now," she said. "That is enough." For a moment, the world outside the archives disappeared. Ronvek looked at her as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in 5 years. He leaned down slowly. Their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and desperate. Years of longing and pain poured into one moment. The silver chain in Nessa's pocket warmed against her skin, reacting to the returning bond. When they pulled apart, Ronvek rested his forehead against hers. "We finish this tonight," he said. "We expose Varen, we end the spell, and then—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Nessa understood. They turned back to the records, searching for more proof. Ronvek found several sealed documents that showed payments from Kalira's father to Varen, along with orders to remove all traces of the previous bond. They were gathering the last of the evidence when footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Ronvek immediately moved in front of Nessa, shielding her. The door to the archives burst open. 6 of Varen's personal guards entered, weapons drawn. Behind them stood Lady Kalira Voss, dressed in a deep red gown, her expression cold and triumphant. She smiled when she saw them. "How touching," she said. The king and his little ghost digging through old lies. Ronvek's voice was dangerously calm. "Step aside, Kalira. This does not concern you." Kalira laughed softly. "Oh, but it does. You see, if you try to expose Varen, my father's involvement will also come to light, and I cannot allow that." She looked directly at Nessa. "You should have stayed dead, little servant. It would have been much cleaner for everyone." Nessa stepped out from behind Ronvek. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I was never dead. I was just waiting." Kalira's smile faltered slightly. Ronvek took one step forward. "Tell your guards to stand down," he said, "or I will make them." Kalira raised her hand. The guards moved in. Ronvek's wolf surged forward. His eyes flashed brighter as he met the first attacker. Nessa stayed close to him, using the silver chain like a small blade to deflect incoming strikes. The fight was fast and brutal in the confined space. But just as Ronvek was about to overpower the last guard, Kalira pulled something from her sleeve, a small black dart coated in shadow root. She threw it straight at Nessa. Ronvek saw it coming. He moved without hesitation, pushing Nessa aside. The dart struck him in the shoulder. He staggered. Nessa caught him before he could fall. Ronvek? The poison spread quickly. Ronvek's breathing grew labored, and his golden eyes started to dim. Kalira smiled coldly. One less problem, she said. Now be a good girl and come with us quietly, Nessa, or the king dies right here. Nessa held Ronvek up, her heart pounding. She looked at Kalira, then at the guards. Then she looked down at Ronvek. His eyes met hers, even through the pain. Don't, he rasped. Don't go with them. Nessa gently laid him against the stone table. She stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the archives. You made one mistake, Kalira. Kalira raised an eyebrow. And what is that? Nessa's eyes began to glow with a faint golden light, the same light that had appeared when Mournfang spoke her name. She lifted her hand. The silver chain floated out of her pocket and wrapped itself around her wrist like a living thing. I am not the same girl you erased 5 years ago. The air in the archives began to shift. And somewhere deep in the palace kennels, Mournfang lifted his head and let out a long, powerful howl. The archives trembled with power. Nessa stood in the center of the room, the silver chain now wrapped tightly around her wrist like a living bond. Golden light pulsed from the mark that had reappeared on her skin, the same mark that had once been burned away. Her eyes glowed with the same light that had appeared when Mournfang first spoke her name. The guards hesitated. Even Lady Kalira took a small step back, her confident smile faltering for the first time. Nessa's voice was quiet, but it carried through the stone chamber. You spent 5 years trying to make me disappear, she said. You took my name. You took my scent. You took the man I loved. She looked directly at Kalira. But you could never take what was always mine. The golden light around her wrist flared brighter. The remaining guards charged. Nessa moved faster than they expected. She didn't fight like a trained warrior. She fought like someone who had been waiting years for this moment. The silver chain extended from her wrist like a whip of light, striking the first guard across the chest and sending him flying into a bookshelf. Ancient scrolls rained down around them. The second guard swung his sword. Nessa ducked low and drove her elbow into his ribs, then slammed her palm against his chest. A pulse of golden energy burst from her hand. The man flew backward and crashed into the stone wall, unconscious. Kalira's face twisted with rage. She pulled a hidden dagger from her sleeve and lunged at Nessa. But before she could reach her, Ronvek, weakened but still standing, grabbed Kalira's wrist and twisted. The dagger clattered to the floor. His voice was rough from the poison. Enough. Kalira glared at him, breathing hard. You're dying, Ronvek. The dart is already in your blood. Even if you kill me, you won't live long enough to see the sunrise. Ronvek's golden eyes burned. I would rather die knowing the truth than live another day as your puppet. He shoved her backward. Kalira stumbled, then turned and fled toward the door, screaming for more guards. Nessa immediately moved to Ronvek's side. He was leaning heavily against the stone table, his breathing labored. The shadow root was spreading fast. Black veins had begun to appear around the wound on his shoulder. Ronvek, Nessa said urgently, we need to get you out of here. He shook his head. Not yet. We have the records. We have proof. He looked at her, his eyes glassy but determined. You have to take them. Go to Mournfang. He will protect you. Nessa's eyes filled with tears. I'm not leaving you. Ronvek reached up with a shaking hand and touched her cheek. You were never meant to be a servant, he whispered. You were meant to stand beside me. Even if I don't make it, you have to finish this. Nessa pressed her forehead against his. You're not dying here, she said fiercely. Not after everything. She helped him to his feet. Ronvek was heavy, but she refused to let him fall. Together, they gathered the most important scrolls and records. As they turned to leave, the sound of many footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. More guards were coming. Nessa looked around quickly. There was only one other way out, a narrow passage behind one of the bookshelves that led deeper into the old tunnels beneath the palace. She pulled Ronvek toward it. They slipped into the darkness just as the first guards burst into the archives. The tunnels were cold and damp. Nessa supported Ronvek as they moved, her golden light providing just enough illumination to see ahead. Ronvek's breathing was getting worse. Every few steps, he had to stop and lean against the wall. Nessa's heart clenched. She couldn't lose him. Not again. They finally reached a small hidden chamber deep underground. It looked like an old ritual room, with faded runes carved into the walls and a stone altar in the center. Nessa helped Ronvek sit against the wall. She quickly tore a strip from her tunic and pressed it against his wound to slow the bleeding. Ronvek watched her with half-lidded eyes. "You're glowing," he murmured. Nessa looked down at her hands. The golden light was still there, stronger than before. "I think the bond is trying to heal you," she said. "But it's not complete yet." Ronvek gave a weak smile. "Then finish it." Nessa looked at him in surprise. "What?" He reached out and took her hand, placing it over his heart. "The bond," he said. "Complete it. Even if it kills me. I would rather die as your mate than live as a stranger to you." Nessa's eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered. "I won't lose you again." She leaned down and kissed him softly. As their lips met, the golden light around her wrist flared and spread to Ronvek. The silver chain on her wrist glowed brightly, connecting them. Ronvek's body jerked once. Then he went very still. For a terrifying moment, Nessa thought she had lost him, but then his eyes opened. They were clearer than before. The black veins around his wound had stopped spreading. His breathing was still labored, but the poison seemed to have slowed. He looked at her with something close to wonder. "Your scent," he whispered. "I can smell it again. After 5 years, I can finally smell you." Nessa let out a shaky laugh of relief and pressed her forehead to his. Ronvek's hand came up to cradle the back of her head. "I remember more now," he said. "Not everything, but enough. I remember the night I gave you that chain. I remember promising you forever." Nessa's voice was thick with emotion. "We're not finished yet," she said. "Varen is still out there. Kalira will tell him everything." Ronvek nodded. "Then we end this tonight." He tried to stand, but his legs were still weak. Nessa helped him up. Together they made their way through the tunnels, heading toward the kennels. Nessa knew Mournfang would be waiting. The mad wolf had already proven he would protect her. As they moved, Ronvek spoke quietly. "When this is over," he said, "I will make sure Varen pays for every day he stole from us." Nessa squeezed his hand. "We will make him pay together." They finally reached the hidden entrance to the royal kennels. But when they stepped inside, they stopped. Mournfang was not alone. High Scent Keeper Varen stood in the center of the kennel, surrounded by a circle of black runes drawn on the floor. Mournfang was trapped inside the circle, snarling and thrashing, unable to break free. Varen looked up when he saw them. He smiled coldly. "I knew you would come here eventually," he said. "The wolf has always been the key." He raised his hand. The runes flared. Mournfang let out a pained howl. Ronvek's eyes widened in fury. "Varon." The High Scent Keeper's smile grew wider. "If you want your wolf back, King Ronvek, then you will have to choose." He pointed at Nessa. Her life, or his. The runes around Mournfang began to tighten, and somewhere deep in Ronvek's chest, His wolf howled in agony. The royal kennels had never felt this silent. Ronvek stood at the entrance, Nessa beside him. Mornfang was trapped inside the glowing black rune circle, his massive body thrashing and snarling in pain. Every time the wolf tried to break free, the runes tightened like invisible chains, drawing blood from his scarred fur. High Scent Keeper Varen stood calmly in the center, one hand raised as he controlled the spell. His cold eyes moved between Ronvek and Nessa. "Well," Varen said, his voice smooth. "What will it be, Your Majesty? The girl you were never meant to remember? Or the wolf that has served your bloodline for generations?" Ronvek's golden eyes burned with fury. His body was still weak from the Shadowroot dart, but his wolf was raging inside him, fighting against the poison. Nessa stepped forward slightly. "Don't listen to him," she said quietly. "He's trying to force you into a choice that doesn't exist." Varen chuckled. "Oh, but it does. The runes are linked to both of them. If I release the circle, the backlash will kill one of them. The only question is which one you are willing to sacrifice." Ronvek took one step into the kennel. His voice was low and dangerous. "I will not choose between them." Varen tilted his head. "Then you will lose both." He clenched his fist. The runes flared brighter. Mornfang let out a pained howl that shook the stone walls. At the same time, Nessa gasped and clutched her chest. The golden mark on her wrist flickered, as if the spell was trying to reach her too. Ronvek moved without hesitation. He lunged forward, faster than Varen expected. Even weakened, the Alpha King's strength was terrifying. He slammed into Varen, sending both of them crashing into the stone floor. The control over the runes wavered for a moment. Nessa didn't waste the chance. She ran straight toward the rune circle. The silver chain on her wrist glowed brightly as she reached out and placed her hand against the invisible barrier. Golden light exploded outward. The runes cracked. Mornfang's massive body jerked once, then the circle shattered completely. The mad wolf stumbled forward, free at last. He shook his head, then turned his single golden eye toward Varen with pure hatred. Varen scrambled to his feet, blood running from a cut on his forehead. He raised his hands again, trying to summon another spell, but Mornfang was faster. The giant black wolf lunged. Varen barely managed to throw up a shield of dark magic. Mornfang slammed into it, snarling and biting at the barrier. Cracks spread across the shield like spider webs. Ronvek pushed himself up, breathing hard. He looked at Nessa. "Are you all right?" Nessa nodded, though her face was pale. "The spell tried to reach me through the bond," she said, "but it's weakening." Ronvek turned back to Varen. The High Scent Keeper was struggling to maintain the shield. His calm mask had finally cracked, revealing fear beneath. "You cannot win this, Ronvek!" Varen shouted. "Even if you kill me, the damage to your wolf is already done. The bond will kill you both." Ronvek stepped closer, his voice cold. "Then I will die knowing the truth. And you will die knowing you failed." He raised his hand. His wolf surged forward one last time, lending him strength despite the poison. A wave of silver energy exploded from his palm and crashed into Varen's shield. The shield shattered. Mornfang didn't hesitate. The massive wolf lunged and sank his teeth into Varen's shoulder. Varen screamed in pain and tried to push the wolf away, but Mornfang was relentless. Ronvek walked forward slowly. He looked down at Varen, who was now pinned beneath the snarling wolf. "For 5 years, you made me mourn a woman who was never dead," Ronvek said quietly. "You stole her name. You stole her scent. You stole my memories." He crouched down so Varen could see his eyes clearly. "Now you will give them back." Varen coughed up blood, but he still managed a weak, hateful smile. "You think killing me will fix everything?" he rasped. "The spell is tied to your bloodline. Even if I die, the damage remains. Your wolf will still die, and so will she. Nessa stepped forward. She knelt beside Ronvek and placed her hand on Mornfang's back. The wolf calmed slightly at her touch. She looked at Varen. Then we break the spell another way, she said. Together. Varen's eyes widened slightly. Ronvek stood up. He looked at Nessa. What do you need? Nessa met his gaze. I need you to trust me, she said. Completely. Ronvek didn't hesitate. I do. Nessa turned back to Varen. She placed one hand on Ronvek's chest, right over his heart, and the other on Mornfang's head. Golden light flowed from her into both of them. The light spread to Varen as well, wrapping around him like chains. Varen screamed. The spell he had cast 5 years ago began to unravel in reverse. Memories flooded back into Ronvek's mind, not in fragments, but in a clear, powerful rush. He saw Nessa clearly for the first time in 5 years. He remembered the night he chose her. He remembered the promises he made. He remembered the way her scent had once been the only thing that could calm his wolf. At the same time, Nessa felt the bond snap back into place, whole, strong, and burning with 5 years of suppressed longing. Varen's body jerked violently. When the light finally faded, he lay on the ground, gasping. The spell he had spent years maintaining had been completely destroyed. Ronvek looked down at him, his eyes now completely clear. Varen stared up at him in terror. You broke it, he whispered. How? Ronvek's voice was calm. Because she was never truly gone. And because I finally chose to remember. He turned to Nessa. She was glowing softly. The golden mark on her wrist had become a full circle again, the complete scent bond mark. Ronvek reached out and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, the bond between them flared to life. For the first time in 5 years, Ronvek could feel her clearly through the mate bond. Her emotions, her strength, her love. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring that Varone was still lying on the ground or that the palace was likely in chaos above them. When they finally pulled apart, Ronvek rested his forehead against hers. I remember everything now, he whispered, and I will never forget again. Nessa smiled through tears. Good, she said, because I'm not letting you go this time. Mornfang let out a low, satisfied rumble and pressed his head against both of them. But their moment of peace was short-lived. From above, the sound of many running footsteps echoed down into the kennels. Lady Kalira's voice rang out. They're down here! The king has gone mad! Ronvek turned toward the stairs, still holding Nessa's hand. His golden eyes were calm but filled with cold determination. Then it's time, he said. Time for the court to learn the truth. He looked at Varen one last time. Take him alive, he ordered Mornfang. He will answer for his crimes in front of everyone. Mornfang growled in agreement and grabbed Varen by the back of his robes, dragging him like a sack of grain. Ronvek and Nessa walked toward the stairs together, side by side. Above them, the entire palace was waking up, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The great hall was filled with tension when Ronvek and Nessa entered. Word had already spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in the corridors. Nobles gathered in small, anxious groups. Guards stood at attention along the walls, unsure of whose orders to follow. At the center of the hall, Lady Kalira Voss stood on the raised dais, her red gown immaculate, her expression carefully composed. She had clearly been preparing for this moment. When she saw Ronvek and Nessa walking side by side, her eyes narrowed. Behind them, Mornfang dragged the bound and battered form of High Scent Keeper Varen across the stone floor. The wolf's golden eye burned with cold fury. The entire court fell silent. Ronvek stopped in the middle of the hall. He still looked pale from the shadowroot poison, but his golden eyes were sharp and clear. Nessa stood beside him, the silver chain glowing faintly around her wrist. She no longer looked like a servant. She carried herself like someone who had finally stepped out of the shadows. Ronvek's voice rang out, strong and commanding. By the authority of the Ashbane bloodline, I call this court to order. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every noble and guard present. 5 years ago, a great crime was committed inside these walls. My true mate was stolen from me. Her name was erased. Her scent was burned from the air, and I was made to believe she had died. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the court. Ronvek continued. High Scent Keeper Varen, with the help of outside forces, used forbidden magic to break the bond between me and Nessa Valegard. He did this so that I could be forced into a political marriage with Lady Kalira Voss. He turned his gaze to Kalira. Kalira lifted her chin, but her hands were trembling slightly at her sides. Ronvek's voice grew colder. Lady Kalira and her father were willing participants in this betrayal. They paid Varen to erase my mate so that their bloodline could sit beside the throne. Kalira finally spoke, her voice sharp. This is madness, Ronvek. You are clearly under the influence of this servant girl. She has bewitched you. Nessa stepped forward. Her voice was calm but carried across the entire hall. I am not a servant, she said. I am Nessa Valegard. And 5 years ago, I was chosen by your king as his mate. She raised her wrist. The glowing scent bond mark shone brightly for everyone to see. Gasps echoed through the court. Ronvek placed a hand on Nessa's shoulder. Varan has already confessed under the pressure of broken magic. The proof lies in the old bond records, which we recovered tonight. Anyone who wishes to see them may do so. He looked around the room once more. I will not force loyalty, but I will demand truth. From this day forward, Nessa Valegard is my mate and queen. Any who stand against her, stand against the crown. For a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, one by one, the guards lowered their weapons and knelt. The elders followed. Most of the nobles knelt as well, though some did so with clear reluctance. Lady Kalira remained standing, her face pale with fury. Ronvek looked at her. Lady Kalira Voss, you are hereby stripped of all titles and lands. You will be confined to your family's estate under guard until a full investigation is complete. If you or your father are found guilty of treason, you will face the same fate as Varen. Kalira's mask finally cracked. She glared at Nessa with pure hatred. You think you've won? She hissed. You're nothing but a forgotten girl who should have stayed dead. Nessa met her gaze without flinching. I survived 5 years of being erased, she said quietly. I can survive your hatred. Ronvek signaled to the guards. Take her away. As Kalira was led out of the hall, Ronvek turned back to the court. He looked at Nessa. Then, in front of everyone, he took her hand and raised it high. This is my mate, he declared. The woman I chose 5 years ago. The woman whose name and scent were stolen from me. And the woman I choose again today, freely and with my whole heart. The court erupted into cheers. Nessa felt tears sting her eyes, but she held them back. She squeezed Ronvek's hand tightly. For the first time in 5 years, she was no longer invisible. After the court was dismissed, Ronvek and Nessa walked together toward the balcony overlooking the palace grounds. Mournfang followed behind them like a silent guardian. The night air was cold, but neither of them seemed to mind. Ronvek stopped and turned to face Nessa. He reached up and gently touched her face. I still have fragments missing, he admitted. The poison and the broken spell have left gaps. But the important things, they're coming back. Nessa smiled softly. We have time, she said. We have the rest of our lives to fill in the rest. Ronvek pulled her into his arms. I don't want to waste another day, he murmured against her hair. I've already lost too many. Nessa closed her eyes and leaned into him. For a while, they simply stood there, holding each other under the moonlight. But peace was still fragile. From the shadows of the upper walkway, a figure watched them. It was not Varen. He was locked away in the deepest dungeon. It was one of Kalira's loyalists, a minor noble who had escaped the hall during the chaos. He slipped away into the night, heading toward the outer walls of the palace. He carried a sealed letter, and in that letter was a single message. The spell is broken. The king has remembered. Send help immediately. Far beyond the palace borders, in the territory of a rival pack, someone received that message, and they began to move. The days following the revelation in the Great Hall were filled with both celebration and tension. Ronvek spent every moment he could with Nessa. He refused to let her return to the servant quarters. Instead, he moved her into the royal wing and had new chambers prepared for her, chambers fit for a queen. The court was still adjusting. Some nobles accepted the truth quickly, especially after seeing the old bond records. Others whispered in the shadows, uneasy about the sudden shift in power. But no one dared challenge Ronvek openly, not after what had happened to Varen and Kalira. Mournfang had become fiercely protective of Nessa. The once mad wolf now followed her everywhere, calm and steady, as if her presence had healed something broken inside him. Many in the palace began calling him the Queen's Wolf. 1 week after the confrontation, Ronvek called Nessa to the highest balcony at sunset. She found him standing there alone, golden eyes watching the sun sink below the mountains. When he heard her footsteps, he turned and smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. "You're late," he said teasingly. Nessa raised an eyebrow. "I was helping the healers treat the guards who were injured during Varen's attack. Some of them are still recovering from the scent magic." Ronvek reached out and pulled her gently into his arms. "You don't have to do everything yourself anymore," he murmured against her hair. "You're not a servant. You're my mate." Nessa leaned into him. "I know, but I spent 5 years invisible. It feels strange to suddenly matter." Ronvek pulled back slightly so he could look at her. "You always mattered," he said quietly. "Even when I couldn't remember you, my wolf knew. That's why it was dying. It was mourning you every single day." Nessa reached up and touched his face. "And now?" Ronvek's golden eyes softened. "Now it's alive again. Because of you." He took her hand and led her to the edge of the balcony. "I want to do this properly," he said. "Not because of politics, not because of pressure, but because I choose you every day from this moment forward." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver chain. It had been cleaned and polished. The small clasp now glowed with a faint golden light. Ronvek gently fastened it around Nessa's neck. "This time," he said, "no one will ever take it from you again." Nessa touched the chain, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked up at him. "I choose you too," she whispered. "Even after everything, even after 5 years of silence, I still choose you." Ronvek leaned down and kissed her, slow, deep, and full of everything they had lost and everything they had found again. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not as a political move, not to fix the past. Marry me because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life making up for every day you were forced to live as a ghost." Nessa smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Ronvek's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. They stood together on the balcony as the last light of the sun disappeared, holding each other while the first stars appeared in the sky. 3 months later, the Moonlit Pack celebrated the bonding ceremony of Alpha King Ronvek Ashbane and his true mate, Queen Nessa Valegard. The Great Hall had been transformed. Silver banners hung from the ceiling, and golden runes glowed softly along the walls. Nobles from allied packs had been invited. Even some former rivals attended, curious to see the woman who had survived being erased. Nessa stood at the center of the hall in a deep silver gown, the glowing scent bond mark visible on her wrist. Ronvek stood beside her in formal black and gold robes, looking every bit the powerful king he was. Mornfang lay at their feet like a living throne guardian, calm and watchful. When the bonding vows were spoken, the silver chain around Nessa's neck flared with light. The same light spread to Ronvek's chest, completing the bond that had been broken for 5 years. The entire court felt it. A wave of warmth and power swept through the hall. Ronvek looked at Nessa with open devotion. "My queen," he said clearly, so everyone could hear. "My mate, my heart." Nessa smiled, her voice steady and full of love. "My king, my mate, my home." They sealed the bond with a kiss, as the court erupted in cheers. Later that night, after the feast had ended, Ronvek and Nessa stood once again on the highest balcony. The palace below them was alive with music and laughter. For the first time in years, it felt like a place of joy instead of secrets. Ronvek wrapped his arms around Nessa from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked quietly. Nessa shook her head. "No," she said, "because every painful day led me here, to you, to us." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "I would go through it all again," she whispered, "if it meant ending up right here with you." Ronvek kissed her forehead. "You'll never have to go through anything alone again," he promised. "Not while I'm breathing." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Far in the distance, beyond the borders of their territory, the rival pack that had received Kalira's message was still watching. But for now, they stayed quiet. The Ashbane bloodline had been restored. The true queen had returned, and the king's wolf was no longer dying. It was stronger than ever, and it had found its mate again.